Welcome to Innovating with Scott Amyx. I'm your host, Scott, and today I'm joined by Dr. Cory Kidd, who is the CEO of Catalia Health. Welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
All right, so Cory, you are an expert when it comes to human-robotic interaction, and of course, having done most of your research at MIT Media Labs, it's not surprising that you've birthed Catalia Health. Now, at the CES just recently, and perhaps for those that are watching this video several months later, you showcase Nabu, which is a personal healthcare companion that's intelligent, that's socially interactive, and it actually conversates with each of the patients. So tell us about why did you choose to have that form, and more specifically, how does that human-robot interaction in a companion context actually increases the drug compliance higher than a simple text message or conversational AI such as Alexa?
Sure. Let me answer both of those questions together by giving a really brief background, which is that I've spent the last about 23 years now building technology to help us solve some of the challenges of scaling healthcare. And a lot of that has been around some of the issues with aging and chronic disease care management. As part of that, I've used lots of different interfaces, whether that be voice interfaces starting more than 20 years ago, so things that are now common in our smart speakers or talking to our phones, a lot of screen-based interfaces, computers, phone apps, etc., and obviously some robotic interfaces, as you brought up. And a lot of the work in trying to understand these has been not so much about the technology, although obviously that's an important part to building these, but really about the psychology. And the quick way to explain why we use a robot and what makes that different is to talk about why we interact with so many people face to face, as opposed to videos like this or emails back and forth or phone calls. And we all get intuitively that face to face is different. When we're talking to someone in person, that's different than anything else. Psychologically, we understand what those differences are. You're more engaged. We create a stronger relationship. That relationship will last longer. And if we compare all these different technology interfaces, the one that actually is similar to that is an interactive robot that can literally look you in the eye while it's talking to you. And so that's really the psychological foundation for everything that we do. The research that shows that an interface like that is, in fact, much more effective at creating long-term engagement. And then your second question is really around how that helps with adherence or compliance when it comes to medications. And if we have a relationship with the patient, if we've built a tool that can be used for an extended period of time, some of the outcomes that we can achieve are the ability to help keep patients on a particular program, a particular therapy, a particular drug for longer than we can with these other types of tools.
Yeah, I think I really like the fact that you honed in on the human psychology and our natural tendencies. The fact that we're very relationship oriented, the fact that we prefer more of a kind of a visceral visual experience as well. So having that form factor, that HMI comes in a cute little robot form, makes it much more connected. And it's interesting because if you look at studies, even in a factory floor, a robotic arm can have an attachment, or the humans that operate that arm can have an emotional attachment. So in the end, are you looking to actually have that be a true companion in the sense of feeling like, oh, because it's telling me to take my next medication, my pill, I'm going to comply because I feel like there's a connection with that device?
It's sort of along those lines, but it's really about building a tool that leverages psychology to give people something that can really help themselves. So a lot of that response and actually following up and taking my meds or answering the questions about what's going on to get that information, back to my doctor or nurse is not so much because the robot is telling me to, that's a tool that's helping me do the things that I want to achieve. And so the way that we set this up, the way that this relationship works is really about what are the benefits to the person, to the individual that's using this when they're trying to manage a condition that goes on for years or for decades.
Now, tell me a little bit about the form factor. Now, it could have manifested into many different forms. It could have just been a camera in a box with a speaker. Why that current version and the look and feel? and as well as the size aspects.
We brought in IDEO, the big design firm, to help do the design of the Nabu robot, and really figuring out what's going to fit effectively into a patient's home. What do people actually like with big eyes that sits on a desktop or kitchen counter or bedside table? And some of it comes from psychology, like the eyes that can move around and make eye contact with you. So the design of the robot really comes from two directions. Is from psychology, and one is purely the design of how it fits into our patient's home. So from a psychological standpoint, the eyes that can look at you turn out to be a key. So if we make this look like we're just putting a tablet there.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about how this form factor and this capability has helped the patient, because you talked about the fact that it's a bit of a self-empowerment tool. They have key objectives around their health improvements. How is that going, and what kind of studies or results can you point to?
So I can say the first randomized controlled trial of this was about 13 years ago now. So there's a lot of studies in the background showing the efficacy of this at engaging patients over time. Before I talk about any data, anecdotally, I can tell you that with any time-limited study that we've done, where we've had this with patients for say a few months, the biggest challenge is at the end of the study, patients with the robots don't want to give them back to us. So we've had great acceptance. Now we're at the phase of commercial rollout. So, we've rolled out with patients across a number of different disease states. We're getting really strong data in terms of, first, the duration of engagement. From the first day to the last day that a patient uses this, that's the main thing that we care about. And with a lot of healthcare apps, that tends to be weeks. And when we're talking about chronic disease, weeks unfortunately doesn't really make a difference. We rolled out our first product with heart failure patients a little under 2 years ago, and we have had patients using it for almost 2 years now. And so we're getting true longevity of this. A lot of our work is in the specialty pharmacy area. So patients who are on particular drugs are using this. And some of the things that we're seeing there is we are able to help keep those patients on that drug for longer. So we're seeing great outcomes. This year for us is really about scaling this up and getting these out to more people who can benefit from them.
Yeah, terrific. Now let's talk a little bit about kind of the underneath the engine in terms of the cloud, but also the algorithms and the API services. The engine, what components have been built in-house versus, let's say, utilizing some other API services?
So the way that we think about it is a lot of stuff on the periphery are things that we license. So for example, the speech recognition and speech output come from Nuance, a Boston area company that also powers Siri's speech recognition capabilities. So, we're not rebuilding that. Similar for our vision algorithms. There's a lot of great stuff out there that we rely on. The core algorithms about understanding what's going on with that patient and generating a conversation on the fly for that person at that point in time are proprietary algorithms that we've built in-house. And so, we have a team that consists largely of 3 types of people for building that product. So obviously there's a lot of technical expertise in how we build those algorithms and deploy them at scale to our patients. All of the content, though, is led by our clinical team. Everything that Nabu says needs to be medically accurate, but at the same time, it shouldn't necessarily sound like a medical textbook. So the clinicians are paired with writers, so people who are good at writing dialogue. And so it's really that trio that implements everything that Nabu says with the patient.
So based on the kind of treatment, kind of specialized medication that they're on, are you having to build essentially a customized data repository for this type of content?
So not exactly. It's kind of somewhere in between, all-purpose and customized. And so what I mean by that is when we start building for a new disease, a new condition that patients are dealing with, we think about 2 sets of things. And the very simple way to think about it is sort of the positive and the negative. So on the positive side, what are the guidelines and best practices? We always come in when we have a patient with a diagnosis and a recommended treatment. We're helping them stick with that. And so medically, we know what the ideal journey is for that patient from there. And we can follow those guidelines in terms of, what we should educate that patient on or check in on or whatever is relevant to that individual. And so that, once that is built for a particular disease state, can apply to lots of patients regardless of treatment. And then, of course, there's the challenge that that ideal journey is the case for pretty much no patient. We're talking about chronic conditions. Things go wrong at times. You have to deal with the issues that come up. And the specifics are going to vary by disease and by treatment and by person and time, but there's really three categories of things. So one is around the symptoms of the condition. What's going on? Is this an issue? Do I need to follow up with it? Is this okay? Is this expected? The second are side effects of that particular drug. And unfortunately, drugs have side effects for some patients at some point in time. How do we help to manage and mitigate those? And our third category are the psychosocial issues. So things like stress and anxiety and depression. And these can affect a lot more people who are dealing with chronic disease versus people without. Now, across all of those categories, there's a lot of those components that we can continue to use for all of our patients, regardless of condition. If we're talking about someone dealing with anxiety, there's a lot that we can use across many different patients. And even if we think side effects of different conditions, different things share different symptoms or side effects. There's a lot of those pieces that we can reuse for new applications and new patients. So essentially, the more that we build, the faster that we get, because there are more pieces that can be used again and again.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that in terms of next milestone for your company, it's really around distribution. So talk to us about how you're planning to get this out to the market in scale.
So the way that it's out there is, as I mentioned briefly, we do a lot of work in the specialty pharmacy space. Now, before us, what might happen for many patients on specialty drugs is, they're going to get a call from their pharmacy in the first 24 hours after the doctor writes a prescription. And that call is going to be, hi, I'm, the pharmacist, sorry to hear about your condition. We've got your prescription. We're checking with your insurance company to make sure it's paid for. We'll be sending this out to you. By the way, we've got this program where one of our nurses can call you once a month. It's no cost to you. Can we enroll you in it? That last little part of that conversation gets replaced with a script that we've written, and it's tailored for that patient population, but it's basically introducing the Nabu program and offering it to the patient, again, at no cost to the patient. And so, in the background, the business structure here is our customer at Catalia Health is the pharmaceutical manufacturer, the big drug companies. And then we partner with the pharmacies who are dispensing the drug, and we ship the device directly to the patient. So, from a patient perspective, the way they get this is if they're prescribed a certain drug, their pharmacy may offer this to them as part of the program. And the benefit there for everyone is that once that device is in the patient's home, the information that we learn goes back to the pharmacy. So the pharmacist and the nurse can do follow-up with that patient. So instead of, before what might have been one call a month, hey, how's everything going? They can talk to Nabu every day, and the pharmacy can follow along with what's happening and reach out if and when necessary to help solve any issues that are coming up or prevent issues that might have happened.
Now, in terms of the pharmacy, it's an issue of training, education, and making sure that the incentives are aligned. So certainly in terms of care and making sure that the right therapy is being done, they're interested. But at the same time, you are introducing a slight change in terms of their script. How are you guys overcoming some of those kind of behavior and adoption issues?
So, there's a lot of work that we do in advance of a particular rollout for integration with the pharmacy. Now, obviously, there's a technical integration part there, but most of it is about workflow integration, and changing as little as possible is our goal. And some of the things that we do for pharmacies is, when that pharmacist is making that call, she or he is reading off the script on the screen, and so that little script we give them is right there. And so there's really almost no change that they have to make. Instead of reading, the paragraph before, they read this paragraph. So, really quite simple. If the patient opts in and says yes, they're checking a box on the screen, we've already done the technical integration. So on the back end now, all of that patient information comes over to us. So they're not filling out any forms. They don't have to go out to some extra portal. That just happens automatically in the background. the data that we're getting back to them is not, what we're not doing is sending them, say, a transcript of every conversation that the patient has with Nabu that they have to read through. As we're designing programs around particular disease states, we figure out what information needs to be transmitted over to them at what point in time. And if, for example, there's an issue going on, a patient is experiencing a flare-up in their disease or a side effect of the medication, we're not just going to dump a bunch of data on them that tells them that. Ideally, they have a workflow that allows us to inject into the nurse call queue, hey, call this patient. And this is the same thing they would have seen otherwise if this had come up, say, through a conversation with the pharmacist. Call this patient. Here's the relevant information that you need to know about what's been going on the last few days. And so our goal is actually to change little to none of the existing workflow and simply get better data that is much more frequent to the clinicians who are providing care for our patients.
Beautiful, beautiful approach. I agree. We're out of time. So my last question is, what has been your greatest product innovation failure and the lesson learned?
So I think a lot of our challenges, Catalia Health is 5.5 years old, comes down to the space that we're working in, right? We're working in healthcare, and of course that's a very regulated industry. And then within that, we're working in the pharma part of healthcare, which is probably the most regulated part of the industry. And we had a lot of challenges early on in making sure that our product worked well in that. One advantage we had coming into this is, many years of experience of putting this in front of patients, but understanding exactly what we can and can't say to patients and how we transmit that data and to whom and when has certainly been a lot of challenges that, fortunately we've been able to successfully overcome and roll this out, but it's certainly been a lot of work to get here.
Sounds great. So with that, I've been joined by Dr. Cory Kidd, who is the CEO of Catalia Health. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you. It's been great to talk to you.